Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, Heritage Foundation, for this great event. Thank you, Bob, as well, for joining. I think I could not be joined by more important people to discuss the importance of what is going on right now globally. This book, Freedom or Equality, was not written considering obviously the risk of a pandemic or the understanding what was going to happen with COVID-19. However, it is interesting to see that the majority of the myths that I tried to debunk in the book, the idea that more government is going to solve all the problems, the idea that what we need is a universal healthcare system with one single payer, and the idea that money printing is going to solve all the problems of humanity are subjects that are currently very hot in the discussion globally about how to solve the challenges that the COVID-19 crisis brings. And the idea behind the book is to provide arguments to the reader so that we can not just counterattack those siren calls that tell us that it's important to give up more freedom in order to get a certain level of security that governments cannot give and that certainly have been unable to give during this crisis. But it's also a book about solutions. It's a book that tries to give ideas on how to develop capitalism to address the rising challenges of the global economy, be it healthcare itself, be it education, environment, etc. It is very important to understand the lessons learned, at least the ones that we should learn from this crisis. The first one is that we should not give more power to governments that have been completely unable to not just analyze and adequately prevent the healthcare crisis, but to understand that if we implemented the measures and the policies that the most radical part of the Democratic Party or so many of the left-wing parties in the European Union and the rest of the world are trying to tell us to implement, which are massive government intervention, what we would have in this crisis would not be just a healthcare crisis. We would have shortages of supplies, we would have problems of achieving and getting the goods and services that we have been able to get, thanks to what? Thanks to competition, thanks to the admirable level of adaptation that companies have achieved in such a drastic and challenging environment, and also due to the free market environment. I think that this crisis shows that more government is not the solution, but this crisis also shows that the way in which governments have addressed the crisis is also very, very important to understand how economies will get out of the crisis. We're talking about recovery right now. We're talking about an improvement in durable goods orders, an improvement in continuing jobless claims in the United States that have surprised everybody in the market. And many people look at the overall macro data and say, well, the United States has implemented similar monetary and fiscal policies to those of the Eurozone. However, the International Monetary Fund or the OECD have massively downgraded the growth estimates for 2020 for the Eurozone and also for 2021, but not for the United States. What is the difference? The difference is supply side measures. What this crisis shows us is that the economy is much more important than what many governments expected. The idea that shutting down the economy was going to be insignificant and generate no harm could only be something created by a bureaucrat. And the idea that the recovery is going to be exactly the same, applying the policies that have been wrongly applied in the previous crisis, was also something that only a bureaucrat could think. If there's anything that has been proven, and I'm sure that Dr. Moffat will talk about it in a couple of minutes, is that it's very interesting to see how the healthcare crisis has been better addressed by those countries that have better levels of economic freedom, as shown by the Economic Freedom Index, and countries that actually spend less relative to GDP on public healthcare. We look at South Korea, we look at Singapore, we look at so many countries that are not just at the top of the table that the index of economic freedom shows, but also at the bottom of the table in terms of massive spending and huge government intervention in areas as key as healthcare. This is an important lesson from this crisis. An important lesson from this crisis as well is to understand that it is impossible to believe that if we have had a challenge to address a pandemic in 2020, that the solution is simply to spend more and more consistently. The monetary policy that governments are following and that central banks are following is already hugely expansionary. There has never been a larger balance sheet in the major central banks all over the world. Secondly, we have never seen a level of government stimuli as the one that we're seeing right now. And the reality is that GDP growth estimates are coming down. So we need to think of supply side measures. And we need to think of supply side measures because this crisis is a crisis that was created precisely by the decision from governments to shut down the economy by law. I think that it's important to address the economic situation with supply side measures because the challenges that we're facing in terms of technology, in terms of job creation, in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, and in terms of the environment can only be addressed thanks to the wonderful combination of competition, free market, and fair trade. It has been a big mistake in the past years to believe that governments would do all of these, and not only at the same time, but more importantly, with the idea that they would do it for the benefit of everybody. It is completely untrue. Why does the book differentiate freedom and equality? Because equality is a consequence of growth, job creation, and prosperity. We cannot put equality as an objective. We cannot put equality as the principle that rules government policy. And we definitely cannot put equality as the only thing that by which societies judge themselves. There is unquestionably a positive in mimic inequality. People do better, and because we see peers of ours doing better, that allows us and that actually incentivizes us to do better ourselves. Inequality in itself is not bad. The worst inequality that exists is the inequality between government and taxpayers. And that is the one that is going to increase more drastically in the next few years. That is why it is so important that we implement important supply side measures, tax reductions to allow the companies that have been suffering in this crisis to return to growth, to recover the investment and to recover the jobs that they have lost in this period. Tax improvements as well in order to allow new companies to come to the market. It's very important to understand that the highest job creators are not just small companies, but the new companies. So we need to incentivize new company generation. Supply side measures as well to allow citizens to have more disposable income. We know that transfers and subsidies don't improve the situation of the middle class and the most disfavored. So what we need to do is to apply those lessons learned, not just from this crisis, but from the mistakes of the past 10 years in which the level of government intervention globally has risen, in which the tax wedge has completely reduced the growth of investment in many economies, to understand that those policies, supply side policies, are the ones that have made the United States a success in recovering capital expenditure growth, in recovering job creation, in recovering wage growth, and actually, funnily enough, in improving equality. So just to summarize, what this book tries to give is ideas so that all of us can discuss the things that are sold to us as magic solutions, debunk them, but also it provides solutions, realistic solutions that can be applied today in order to improve the welfare for all without equalizing down, which is the only thing that governments can do through massive intervention.